Welcome to this screencast on the Constitution. The Constitution is the centerpiece of the American government. It is the document that established the United States and is still the highest law in the land. Though it was written more than 200 years ago, it is important to recognize that the document is not just something that was written then, stored somewhere, and forgotten about. It's actually a living document. It can be added to and changed, and then people are always looking at it to see how modern laws match its meaning. That, by the way, is pretty much the entire job of the Supreme Court. It's really important that you can tell the difference between the Constitution and the other famous document in American history, the Declaration of Independence. People get them confused a lot, so here's a little explanation. First, you have to know that the first battles in what eventually would be known as the Revolutionary War started around 1775. Actually, the animosity between the two countries goes back before then, but for the most part in 1775 is when things really started to get cooking. America was then a colony of Britain, which was kind of like being in a bad relationship with someone who doesn't give you any space, bosses you around a lot, makes you always pay for things, and borrows your stuff without asking. America had kind of had it by then and wanted to be free of Brit, the bad boyfriend. They wrote a letter to Britain. The content was basically, "Sorry that it has come to this, but I'm breaking up with you. It's not me though, it's you. You're way too overbearing. Maybe we can be friends later, but right now I need my space. Please get your stuff, especially your stupid hats, and move out. I think the other side of the Atlantic would be about far enough. Oh, and don't let the door hit you on the way out. Bye-bye." So, the Declaration of Independence is that now famous breakup letter. Keep in mind that it was written at the start of the war, 1776, and explain why America no longer wants to be a colony. We'll study it more in the spring. Well, you can imagine how Britain responded to being dumped. This was the world's #1 empire after all, and it simply didn't want to hear that. Next came a whole lot of battles, a lot of frostbite, some mercenaries, and some pretty severe ex-boyfriend tactics by the Brits, who just couldn't seem to move on. Finally, in 1781, came the big showdown in the Battle of Yorktown, and by then, the Brits took the hint. Epic ponage. That led to a peace treaty between the Brits and the Americans in 1783. America finally got rid of the Brits and their silly, silly hats. But by then, America had won the war but faced a new kind of problem. This was all a little scary, being on your own. There had always been kings and queens, it seemed, but now the Americans wanted a different type of government, and there really was no plan for that. Plus, all the 13 colonies were kind of like their own countries, so they had to figure out how to bring them all together. There were lots of attempts to cooperate between the colonies after the end of the war, but there were still lots of areas of disagreement remaining. Finally, in 1787, leaders from 12 of the 13 colonies agreed to come together to have a meeting and draft a big rule book for the new country. 55 men from 12 of the colonies, Rhode Island did not come, came together in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 for a long meeting. It took about 4 months. Now remember, the Declaration of Independence says, hey, we want our own country. But then the Constitution is more like, well, we have our own country, now what do we do? How should we organize it? Long story short, they produced this document. The final draft was produced in September of 1787. It was then taken to all the states, who looked at it and decided if they wanted to pass it or not. In order to pass, the document needed 9 of the 13 states to agree to it. It then became ratified. The 9th state to sign it was New Hampshire, and once that happened, the document was official and in place. So, what's in it? Well, there are 3 basic parts. The preamble, the articles, and the amendments. First off, the preamble, and that's a fancy word for saying the opening. This tells what the basic point of the document is. Lots of school kids have had to memorize this. In fact, I did in 5th grade. But for now, it's just important that you read it and understand it. If you take a moment to think about it, though, it's pretty awesome. This is the first time in history that a country had been organized as a democracy. At that time, it wasn't quite a perfect democracy. You had the existence of slavery, which kind of puts a lie to some of the things that are said here. But nevertheless, it was a big step over what had been normal before then. Here's what it says. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, to give you a version that's a little hard to understand, because there's a lot of words in there that we just don't use very much anymore, here is my more modernized version. We, the people of the United States, in order to make a better country, establish justice, ensure peace in the country, provide for protection from other countries, promote everybody's well-being, and make sure that we're free, now and for all the generations that come after us, have created and will use this Constitution. Now let's look a bit at the main text. To boil it down to the basics, there are three main purposes you should keep in mind. First, the Constitution is the supreme law of the United States. If you are wondering whether a law is fair or not, you are essentially doing what the Supreme Court does. They look to see that laws passed in, say, a city or a state or even at the federal level match the basic laws contained in the Constitution. For the most part, this involves interpretation. One way to think about the Constitution is that it's one big rule book for what government can do, such as Congress can raise money for a navy and declare war, the president gets to lead the war, and also what government cannot do. Government cannot take away the freedom of Americans to protest or their right to speak their minds. All future laws have to align with the basic laws explained in the Constitution. Second, the Constitution lays out the basic structure of the government. The president can do this, but can't do that. Or the people who run for Congress must be such and such years old and have lived in that state for such and such years. All that stuff is explained in the Constitution, especially the articles at the beginning. This part gives a blueprint about how the country will be organized. The third main purpose is that it guarantees the basic rights of all Americans. This is laid out first and foremost in the Bill of Rights, which are, technically speaking, were added on to the original content after its original passage, but not very long after the original was passed. An amendment, by the way, means an addition or a change. The Bill of Rights is where you find the concept of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, and so on. I'll do another screencast later about the 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights. For now, just know that its purpose is to lay out what the rights of a citizen are. Here we go. Here's the main points. The Constitution is the document written after the Revolutionary War and the one that established the United States. The preamble is awesome. The first time in history a country had been organized like this, and a real change from all that had preceded it. Even if you're not American, let's say you're Japanese or you're Italian or you're Canadian or anything, and you live in a democracy, you partially owe that idea to the ideas first put in place in America about 230 years ago. It is the supreme law of the United States. All things must be checked with how they jive with the language and the rules and the principles laid out in the Constitution. Next, it lays out the structure of government, tells who can do what and who checks whose power and so on and so forth. And number 5, it guarantees the basic rights of all Americans. This section is primarily, this purpose is primarily expressed in the Bill of Rights. Thank you. Bye-bye.